He borrowed money from his sister, from his friends, and he kept very good accounts of all the money he spent and all the money he owed. So we see every day the money he spent for bread, for groceries, for rent. Well, his parents were not getting along at all. They were very distant. His mother was a very submissive and withdrawn type of person. She was a painter, and she spent more and more time in her attic studio painting. The father was involved in politics and very outgoing, and they were drifting apart. And mealtime became very difficult in the family because there was no speaking at all unless the father was throwing some kind of a tantrum about something. And eventually the parents announced they were going to divorce. And this just crushed Pier Giorgio, and especially was at a time when divorce was almost unheard of. So he said to one of his friends one day, "I would gladly give my life if my parents would stay together." He went mountain climbing that second week of June. I think it was June the 13th, 1925, and he had a beautiful picture taken by a friend of him near the top of this mountain. And so he wrote on the back of the picture, "Verso l'alto," which means toward the top. And that was his last mountain climb, and that little expression he used was almost prophetic, because within a few weeks he had visited a poor person who was sick with polio. And Pier Giorgio caught the polio. And in those days, there was no vaccine against it, and there was no way to cure it once you had it. And Pier Giorgio, for the first time in his life, experienced some, pain to the point where he asked a maid for an aspirin tablet. So it was the first time he ever asked for any kind of medication. So the maid knew that he was sick, but at the same time, his grandmother died. And so the whole family was caught up in the wake and the funeral for the grandmother, and they didn't even notice that Pier Giorgio was staggering down the hallway to visit his grandmother's body in the bedroom, that he collapsed 3 times on the way down the hall, that he was moving around from room to room. He slept on the pool table one night because the bed wasn't hard enough. And even the last photograph they took of him, he has a very strained expression on his face. They did not realize he was really sick until 2 days before he died. And then they went into a panic. They tried to send to France for a vaccine, but there was a snowstorm in the mountains and no plane could get through. And so they had to resign themselves to his death. The night before he died, he was in his bed, and he asked his sister to go to his wardrobe and get his jacket, because in his jacket pocket was a prescription that he had. And he asked to write a note. Well, he could hardly write because his body was paralyzed, and his sister offered to write the note, but he insisted on doing it himself. He said, "This is my responsibility." And he wrote the note, which we still have, and he gave it to his sister for a friend. It says, "Here are the injections for the poor man converso." Apparently he also had some syringe injections for this man's medicine. He said, "Here are the injections for the poor man converso." The receipt for the injections belongs to another friend, Sapia. He said, "Please renew the prescription and charge it to my account at the pharmacy." The last thing he did was thinking of someone else's need. And then on the next day, which was July the 4th, 1925, he died in a lot of pain and agony. When he died and they had the funeral, 10,000 people came. Of course, there was the usual family and friends, but also his university friends. 500 kids came. His friends said after he died, "We never realized he was a saint when he was with us, but the moment he died, we knew." He had just finished a degree in engineering. I should mention here that Pier Giorgio, of course, was a layman. He was not a priest. He thought of becoming a priest, but his mother said, "I'd rather see you dead." He thought of getting married, and he brought a girlfriend of his to his home, and his parents received her very politely, but afterwards they said, "You can't marry her because she's too poor for you." He thought of being a lay missionary among Italian immigrants in Germany or in America, and that's why he was getting a degree in engineering, so he could work in the mines among the poorest of the people. His father said, "No son of mine is going to dirty himself working with the poor. You're going to work in the newspaper with the family." And so he was thwarted in what he wanted to do with his life. He had not found his life's vocation yet, but that didn't deter him from doing something with his life. So many young people feel that until they get married or until they get a steady job, that they have a right to just waste time. They have a right to go out and stay out late every night, go to parties. They have a right to their parents' money to go drinking and to smoke and to do drugs and to run around and just have a great old time. And their parents will always support them. They never have to worry about this. We have a lot of young people like that who have no purpose in life. And Pier Giorgio didn't live like that. He found a purpose in his life, serving the poor and the sick and loving our Lord and going to prayers. So all these people came to the funeral, and his parents were so stunned that they stayed together and they converted their lives, and they worked then for the canonization of their son, which was thwarted then. 5 years after Pier Giorgio died, which is the normal length of time, they began the process of canonization, but Mussolini stopped it. He put pressure on priests in the church, cardinals in the church, to not have this canonization because the Frasatti family was opposed to the fascists. The father had also published articles against Mussolini, had resigned as ambassador, resigned as senator, and Mussolini took away from them their nice home in the city and made it an office building, took away the newspaper business and sold it at a cheap price to another family that now owns it, the Agnelli family, and they're Masons. And so tried to reduce the Frassattis to poverty. It didn't work. The father was offered a job later on working with the Italian gas company. But they stopped the canonization process. They spread rumors that Pier Giorgio was not such a good and holy boy after all, that he was having a lot of premarital sexual affairs, and that the boy had not died, that the parents had buried him alive because they were embarrassed that their boy was becoming a cripple and didn't want to raise an invalid. So nothing was done on the cause for a number of years. And finally, Pope Paul VI came along. And Pope Paul VI, when he was a young priest, had become the chaplain of the youth group that Pier Giorgio belonged to. So he ordered the cause to be opened. And for 7 or 8 years, he was waiting for the cause to be finished. The cause means all the paperwork, the investigation, the interviews that have to go on to find out, about this person's life. And after 7 or 8 years, nothing had happened. And Pope Paul VI found out that these cardinals and bishops had still given in to the forces in Italian politics that didn't want Pier Giorgio canonized. So the Holy Father was angry. Some people said it's the only time they ever saw him angry. And he pounded on desk and he said, "Bring the papers to me. I will open the cause myself." And so he started it. And then John Paul II came along. And Pope John Paul II is a mountain climber and a skier when he was a younger man. And when he was a young boy, he had read about Pier Giorgio in a mountain climbing magazine for young Catholic students and had been inspired by the story, just as I hope you'll be inspired. I'll give you some more information. And he had developed a great love for Pier Giorgio. So he completed the cause, and he's the one who beatified Pier Giorgio. And usually when saints are canonized or beatified, because it's a costly ceremony and all of that, they'll usually do several saints at once and have a group mass. Even when Blessed Faustina was beatified, she was along with 5 or 6 other saints. But the Holy Father gave Pier Giorgio the privilege of having his own ceremony because he said Pier Giorgio became holy without the help of his family, without the help of being in a seminary, without the help of being in a religious order. He did it all by himself with his own response to God. He did it quietly, he did it anonymously, and yet he touched thousands of lives